We are embarking on our third season, and we did talk about deflecting kind of to a new approach, and that is to kind of get away a little bit from the process parts and the technical aspects of being a project manager, which, by the way, are important. We devoted 2 years. We devoted almost 100 episodes to those aspects of what we do as project managers.
Right.
But I think for this year, and maybe we'll play with it a little bit today, but one of the thoughts I had was to kind of go into some of my background just a little bit in terms of kicking us off. You and I have talked about this, but I named my company when I left one of the big system integrator shops. I left in 2003. I named my company People First Project Management. And the reason I did that was, again, technically, I was a strong project manager in terms of, all the things that project managers need to do to deliver their projects on time, within budget, and to have a satisfied client. But What I didn't like about the way we ran projects, it wasn't just this company, but it was almost every company I'd worked with and for, was the way that they kind of kept the people aspects second place. And sometimes they mistreated people in terms of indifference or in terms of actual, sometimes antagonism towards people. And I thought, the only way we can do this job is through people. The technology helps us, but it's through people that we need to do this. And so when I left corporate America and started my own practice, I decided to focus on people first, training corporations to put their people first, training project managers to put people first. And so I think that's, from that perspective, I'm kind of liking our bent this year towards the human aspects of what we do as project managers.
You hit on a major factor, and this has been building. If you listen to the experts and if you do your research, we forget that companies and people receiving the benefits of projects are looking for the benefits. This is a mechanism of just human behavior, working together as groups. If we actually do that, we eventually get to a point where we impact the work. And it usually has to do with resources, physical and human resources, or duration. One way or another, it comes back to people. And by doing that, we get to a point where we drive to our company and say, hey, why aren't we having profitability? Why are we having all these safety events? Why are we having these things happen? And we realize as corporations that it was our own fault for not caring and maintaining and supporting the source of our benefits, the work itself, the people who do the work.
Well, and not only that is, I've done a lot of projects in my 40 plus years as an IT specialist and a project manager. And I don't recall a single project that wasn't done for the benefit of people.
That's the whole thing. We could take this in many directions. That is a major statement that covers many types of territory. Number one, which people are the project for? Yeah. That's something we need to talk about. Number two, how do we take care of people? And what do we have? 3, 4 types of people that we really do need to take care of: our stakeholders and our teams and our decision makers and ourselves. And how do we do that? And how do we do it in such a way that, number one, it doesn't get in the way of the project, and number two, it actually helps the project become more successful? That's the conversation we're aiming at. I like that.
It is. And especially when I think about these last couple of years, where there's been almost too many changes to just kind of take on. I mean, it's coming at us from every single direction. And I think there's some critical impacts that we need to be tracking. And I want to just understand, even from your perspective, of how it is that we can kind of get ourselves involved and be able to handle all of these changes and still be sane at the end of the day.
Let's do two things today. Okay. Let's go through the impact of those changes. We'll look in the ways that we were looking at last week, right? We're going to look at the environment, we're going to look at the business, and we're going to look at people, right? But second of all, let's think about it from an analytical standpoint. Is this truly indicative just of projects? Is it truly indicative just because we're at a certain time in history, or is there something else going on that we need to be aware of? If we can actually start getting into that conversation, I think we can actually have some meaningful discussion that can help us and help the people, the project managers who follow us.
Yeah, and I think two caveats. One is that wherever we go with this discussion, we need to bring it back to project management.
Yes.
And secondly, so that people who are listening to us understand that these are our opinions based on our experience. It doesn't mean that everything we talk about is exactly 100% correct for your situation in your project at this time. So that's just a couple caveats that I really want to start off on before we have this discussion.
Now, your experience is 30 or 40 years, and education and training. And my experience is only about 25 years and 30 years and being, an advisor in business and doing a lot of research in my teaching that's come out. So I think we're probably pretty well informed to be able to lead these. And again, you're right. It's still well-formed opinion. It's our judgment. And I think we need to, and it's on our shoulders to give people ideas and experiments to try to see what they find out. Have them decide for themselves.
Well, exactly. And I'll tell you, here's the interesting thing about experience. Using an experience from a previous project, I was able to make things better on the current project. And that's happened several times. There's also been times when looking back at the experience on a previous project didn't work at all in the same situation for this project. So again, as you were saying, it's a judgment call. It's a timing call. But at any time we need to, as project manager, make sure we're agile. And I don't mean agile in terms of methodology. I mean agile in terms of our approach, adaptive and resilient, because some of these things come at us hard.
Yeah, indeed. So let's start off at the big picture. Let's zoom out and say, okay, within the context of projects, in the business environment, inside and outside the organization, and even outside the corporation, how can we as project managers track these changes? How can we be plugged in order to actually find what's going on in the world that we could actually be a little proactive about?
That's interesting. I think you gave me a couple of acronyms a couple of weeks back. One was what, PESTEL or was it PESTEL or LE?
PESTLE, and the other one was TECOP, TECOP.
And those were acronyms that you used to kind of remind yourself as a project manager the kinds of things that we as project managers need to look out for. If I look at PESTEL, only one of those, the T, is technological, which tends to be where project managers put all of their efforts and focus.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. This actually pulls out the discussion and gives you a broader understanding of how changes can impact. And let's just look at PESTEL. Yeah. And then we can actually talk about a couple other prompt lists too. Okay, PESTEL says, okay, what are the categories that I can find requirements, that I can find EEFs, that I can find risks, and that I can find major potential for change or even active changes. And that's where we break things down into the politics. The politics are the hard discipline that govern our nation, our state, and even our corporations, right? Are they changing? Are they in flux? I don't think that's a question to answer right now, but that's a question we need to ask.
Well, and more intensely, perhaps, as a person who's working on a project, for an organization. Yeah, things can happen out there legislatively, that's fine. But typically it's the politics inside the organization. I mean, who has lived through the change out of a CEO and what that can do to a project? I mean, projects have been stopped with the new CEO's new vision. So that, yeah, those sorts of things are things that we need to look out for. So P is political.
And E is economic, finances. Who has had a project that was shelved because the money wasn't there that they planned for, or they had to use the funding for an emergency somewhere else inside the company?
Or the project manager wasn't paying attention and overran their budget.
And then we go to social, and social is interesting, where we had the hard, firm and rules and the policies of a corporation or the government in politics. In social, we have the culture, which are the unwritten laws and rules. Is there a changing culture? And I think we all can agree that we're going through a major cultural shift for many reasons.
Well, and you know, we've lived through those. I mean, you and I are called baby boomers, and then, you know, there's the millennials and the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs and all these gens. So each of those bring their own cultural aspirations and cultural challenges. So I think we've been aware of social aspects to our projects and to our organizations for some time now.
And here's the real kicker. Even in project management, we've been observing a huge social transform. It's a tsunami.
Yeah.
that we've been experiencing since about 2015, where, you know, you and I applauded embracing not just the technical aspects of project management with the talent triangle and PMI, but saying, hey, we have to double down in leadership and we have to understand business. And all of a sudden, you know, in 2019, 2020, all of a sudden, Agile becomes a requirement to get the PMP certification. And we have to scratch our heads a little bit about that. But at the same time, you know, looking around and seeing the volatility of our environment, both inside our companies and in business, these whole conversations make sense.
Well, and so we've looked at already political, economic, and social, and all of those we need to be observing of, because they can come at us from left field and we don't even realize they're happening. But,
and then there's the technology. No, technology hasn't changed at all, has it?
no, it hasn't. But here's one thing I will say, and I'm trying to think if I've been on 20 plus projects, probably, in terms of inception to completion to implementation. I can count on the fingers of one hand. Actually, I can count on the fingers of one finger the number of projects that have been challenged because of technology.
Yeah. Well,
we've got technology down fairly well. It's all of the things surrounding the technology.
Well, yeah, it's the disruption through technology, but not just that, but the changes in technology. Remember when we went into lockdown and everybody was using WebEx, and we found Google, and we didn't like Google, and Microsoft was bringing in Teams, and then all of a sudden a little no-name called Zoom bust onto the environment, and it disrupted the whole market for remote working. So even though our technology may be stable, it is still prone to great disruption.
Right. And of course, there's legal. The L in PESTEL is the legal aspects.
Yeah. And then we cannot forget environmental too. Right. If you think that my company is not prone to influences and changes in the changing environment, look at things like supply chain. You know, my copper cable wasn't here because their processes are just in time, and they're being hit by 5 vendors who are late because of. This is where, you know, all of these aspects, these categories are critical for us to understand.
Well, just even think of the cars, the automobiles, trucks, cars that people wanted to buy but couldn't because of a chip shortage. tied up in the supply chain. So yeah, it did affect us.
Yeah, and it continues to, and it's going to continue to affect businesses and our projects. TCOP is sort of similar. It's another acronym, and it still talks about technical, economic, but it brings in commercial, which talks about business to business relationships. And we know that my competitor this week could be a fellow traveler and can save my project next month. So this is a totally different world that we live in now. There's a term for it called coopetition, which is really fascinating. We can't think of any single company or any single entity as a true competitor, as we saw in the 70s and 80s. We're all in it to make sure that the supply chains keep going. We want the game to continue. We don't want to win at the cost of the game.
Well, and even when I was working for corporate America as a system integrator, there were times that we would partner with our strict competitors in order to keep another competitor out of the market, or in order, just to be able to split the pie a little bigger between the two of us. So yeah, there's always advantages to looking at all aspects of these untechnical or non-technical aspects of what we do as project managers.
Boy, you reminded me of one of my favorite portfolios. We were launching a product that was creating a new market. Okay. We had 17 companies, fellow travelers. 3 of them were direct competitors. And because everybody didn't want to push anybody out, but they wanted a bigger piece of a new pie. And so through this collaboration, we were actually able to drive not just a new market, but a whole economy around this new market, which was a fascinating experience.
So it's nice to have these things like PESTEL and TEPOC and all these things kind of in our back pockets, but think of some of the impacts, and I know there's others that we can discuss at some other time, but think of some of the impacts that we as a society, we as a culture, we as project managers have gone through that may have kind of hit us from left field, have surprised us over the last couple of years. And had we been paying attention with our PESTEL and our TEPOC, how might we have done things a little differently? But what are some of the things that you're thinking that may have hit us the last couple of years, that whether they're good or bad or whatever?
Remote working. I think that is a churn. It's been identified as one of the major disruptors in business and culture, in society. And we're still right in the middle of figuring out how that works. Information workers, right? Information workers work best when they're connected to their information. And now, sometimes information workers can actually work best when they're in solitude. And solitude can be best when they're working from home. No distractions, no disruptions. But it's a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
Because remote working also promotes isolation. And this is what I'm discovering. We as managers, especially project managers, do not know the manager's role in managing remote workers. I think we're learning the discipline and the structure and being able to do our own work, but we're just scratching the surface on how to understand how to manage our remote workers. And we have to learn that and learn it fast, because number one, we could have another virus here any moment. And number two, this technology is not going to go away. In fact, I think that this is going to, this is only going to become more and more of a discussion, because there is so much savings that companies can have, putting a desk up, putting a space in a building up, the brick and mortar, building buildings or renting buildings. And I know companies are trying to figure this out. And there are some people out there that are actually leading the way, those early adopters, and the wisdom that they have, and some of the wisdom through the research and analysis that the early 2000s have given us, I think we have an opportunity to implement and use to our advantage inside projects.
Well, we do. And I agree with you 100% that managers were caught off guard in terms of how do I manage my remote workforce. I'm glad for the technological aspects of being able to allow for remote work. I think I gave the example of one of the projects I've been on. When this hit, within 2 to 3 days, they had moved the entire development environment to the cloud so that people from all over the world could work on the project. That was great, except for people all over the world now had to be somehow brought together through time zones, through whatever it is, to be able to have them collaborate. And the challenge was that not every person in the remote workforce is as disciplined as you want them to be. And they get, solitude, isolation, all of that good stuff. It could be good stuff in terms of being able to promote good productivity. But, I've got in my own office, I've got a TV in the corner. I've got my sprinkler system coming on back here. I've got my garden growing over here. It's easy to get distracted from what we want to do, from what we need to do to what we want to do. As these things, I'm home, I can do these things now. So there's that aspect of it I think we were totally unprepared for.
And think about it from what you and I like to talk about, human behavior.
Yeah.
One of the best ways to get people involved is to engage them and to make sure that the communication is constantly flowing. I think the tools are there. I think the management of the engagement, the communication has it. I think this is a behavioral and a human relationship solution more than it is a technical or a procedural solution. I think this is, and again, that's what a lot of the experts are starting to point to.
And I can agree with that, because if you're looking at just plain productivity, and let's say we're talking about coding, so productivity of the coder and accuracy of what code what was implemented. If I look at those two things, I have benchmarks from prior pandemic that I can measure against. Has my productivity of my team fallen since what they could do pre-pandemic? Has their accuracy and the number of defects that are coming out of their code increased since I was measuring those pre-pandemic? So we have the understanding of whether or not we're doing as well or better than we used, or worse. But now how do we handle that? And I think that's exactly part of what the project manager, or what our industry has to figure out now.
Yes. And I think that we as project managers are in the forefront of solving this. We're boots on the ground. We're touching real humans and real work. And we have contained experiments called projects. And we as project managers, if we can invest in looking at capturing lessons learned, sharing lessons learned, creating that debate inside of our projects for this conversation, so we can bring that to our project management community, I think that we actually as project managers can be a major part of the solution.
I think we have to be. I think that's what it comes down to. Can I offer my observation of what kind of came from left field?
Please do.
And I've mentioned this in past podcasts, but the whole AI, the whole artificial intelligence, and the one that's the open AI product, Chat GPT, is the one that's kind of getting all of the attention, even though there's probably 40 lookalikes. But I think it's good and I think it's bad. And I'll give you two examples. I was just reading a news story of a lawyer, I think it was in New York, who used Chat GPT to create his brief form. I may have some of the details incorrect, but the concept is here. So having this Chat GPT create his brief form sending it into the judge and having it rejected because all 5 examples that he had used in the brief were fictitious, made up by Chat GPT. So that's the bad aspect. Now, the good aspect, I was given a technological challenge by my client and a very little time to do it. So I asked a very pointed question to Chat GPT. I'm having trouble saying that acronym. And it came back with a 500-word response, which was pretty good. But it gave me the option of asking it again. So I asked it again. It came back with another 500. I asked it again, came back with another. So by now I've got a couple thousand words. And I read through this and I go, I never thought of that. Half of this doesn't make sense to me. I'm throwing it away. This part didn't affect my outline. This part did. And by the time I completed my presentation to my client, they loved it. But it wasn't Chat GPT that created the material. It was Chat GPT that created the concept that I could work with and then present it. It cut my time by more than 50%. And I gave a very decent response to my client.
So you're echoing what everybody else is. And by the way, the mechanism that you're using Chat GPT through is Delphi analysis. Basically, you're taking the same question to multiple experts in multiple contexts, and then you're comparing them and see what the Venn diagram of the result comes out with. That's exactly what we do. When we can't find a solution, we find multiple experts. And I think you're actually shining a light on how project managers could use this. You're right. Chat GPT, especially right now, needs that trust, but verify.
Yeah.
We need to consider the source. I think that all experts who use tools like AI right now need to actually double down on the validation and the verification. You're taught that in technical writing, right? Consider the source. You follow back and you follow the chain. You go down to the citations on the bottom of the document, and you walk back and you see how verifiable the data is. And now, even more so, we have to do that.
But think about it this way. When this first came out, Chat GPT, I thought this is not good. This is terrible, this whole AI approach to it. But then I thought, when I was in college, if I had to write a paper, I had to go to the library. I had to find a bunch of books. If I was allowed to, I had to then spend money to copy pages to take home. I would read through all of the information I had copied. And from that, I would create my term paper. Now, that might take a couple of weeks and a lot of strain. When I went from that to, let's say, Googling, using Google or using Bing or something to look for information, there was there was an immediate increase in productivity. So now if I go from Google or Bing to Chat GPT, but use it in the way it's intended to be used, I get again that increase in productivity. So I'm looking at it as a productivity tool, which caught me by surprise, but it's a happy surprise when used correctly.
Exactly. And we have to understand this. It's a tool. It's not a master. And the owners of OpenAI, the CEO and the board of directors, have committed to saying that this is a servant. This is never going to be a master, which gives me a lot of optimism, at least as long as they are running the ship over there.
So if I were to use our previous discussion, the PESTEL or the TEPOC, in terms of my next project, and knowing some of these environmental, some of these political, some of these legal, some of these social, some of these economic changes, it can help me be a better project manager.
When we think about major changes like this, a change can be a change for the worse or a change for the better. Yeah. And we use the same tools to manage both opportunities and threats. What we have to be is proactive. We have to identify these changes, we have to assess them, we have to prioritize them, and we have to work on the major ones that are really big. And the major ones is the working environment itself.
Yeah.
And the problem is the working environment may not be changing a lot because business is business. We pretty much teach business the way we have for the last 50 years. But the response of business to ongoing change is what we have to be ready for. Like in lockdown, and we're coming out of lockdown. Okay, that I as a project manager have to be prepared for a discussion with my sponsor saying, Tim, what are your thoughts in bringing the workers back into the office?
Right. Well, and think about that. I mean, we've been talking about the people aspects and very selfishly about project managers, but we serve business, and business has a way of, business has its own driving forces, much like people do. So what in terms of some of the things that we might look at there as project managers, do you have any comments on that?
I think there are three factors, and there are three factors that have been brought up in the most white papers over at Harvard Business Review. And also they've been talked about in public discourse, as well as a lot of the more popular, current events in business books that you can buy at a store. Number one, the testing and the comments on the model of shareholder supremacy. I think that's actually still going on. Should we use the investors of a company to determine the direction of the corporation? This is something that you and I can explore, and we can talk. I think you and I have strong opinions there. Number two is the reaction to all of the disruption through COVID. Corporations want to get back to profitability, which means they want to do things, basically the way it was. They want status quo, but they want status quo 4 or 5 years ago. But the problem is we have a weakened supply chain. We have a weakened communication chain. Our relationship to major players on the international market are fragile. And as a business, we have to really be careful with that too. And if you think international relationships doesn't hurt corporations, you're talking about the transistors and not being able to get enough chips, lithium and batteries. Yeah. You remember for the last 2 or 3 years, the supply of lithium available was drying up, and it was creating a crisis. This actually caused a lot of the automobile companies to rethink, are we going to roll out all electric vehicles in 1 year, 5 year, or 10 years? And this changed the whole spectrum of the direction and the progress, and also the optimism and the trust in technology. These things, are affecting not just businesses. This is affecting our projects too.
Well, yeah, because after all, just like humans, businesses are in it to survive.
Yes.
They're in it to profit. They're in it to be stable. They're in it to provide for people, but they're in it to survive. And so as a result of that, in many ways, their motivation is similar to people's motivation.
Yeah, and let's take it on the opposite side. Workers inside the company may say the decisions to business to survive is hurting the workers. Well, the beautiful thing is, the more you know about why business is making decisions, actually makes you more knowledgeable and more informed and more apt to make a better decision for yourself as to how you navigate this complexity.
Yeah, and I've been in those situations where there's a fine line between how much do you tell your teams, your workers, your workforce, how much do you hold back? And there's always that, if I hold back too much and it comes out later, do I lose my trust? If I share too much, do I end up creating a sense of panic and lose my workforce because they go elsewhere? So there's those sorts of, and I'm talking about, say, negative situations. So there's always that fine line of how much do workers need to know, how much should your workforce know about what's going on in the company?
Yeah, this is, and I have wanted to talk with you on the show about that. Communication. And historically, communication management has two concepts that are repeated. Well, a lot of them, but the two in our topic is, number one, we share appropriate information. I think we need to explore, what do we mean by appropriate information?
Yeah.
And number two, the fact that 90% of our efforts is making sure information flows. Information is sort of like nutrition for a project, and the flow of information is like the circular system in the body. And we know what happens when we shut off circulation. You know, our arm goes to sleep, and we don't want that to happen on our project. So how do we, like I said, once again, how do we navigate this complexity? And like you said, balance on the edge of the sword to finding that optimal or that appropriate amount of information.
I think that's the right word is optimal. And the other word that I will share with optimal is experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, you know, a junior manager may just spill too much if they know too much, sort of thing. But let me give you an example from my own experience. And that was when I was a very young programmer, fresh out of college, pretty much. I joined an up and coming startup company, been in business for a few years, but it was had decided to go along the lines of something new called systems integration. And where it was turnkey, where they would take the entire project, involve the client in the solution, but they would go from startup to implementation. And so it was a fairly new company. Well, we were growing very quickly. I think I was employee number 300 or in that vein. And there we hit a patch where we had cash flow issues, which happens with a lot of startups. But the cash flow issues were serious enough that it could have brought down the company. Now, I'll call him Rod because that was his name, the owner of our company, could have said, look, we got all these cash flow problems. I'm not sure how we're going to get through this, but hang in there, folks. How many young people like myself would have hung in there? Now, my resume would have been on the street that afternoon. But what Rod chose to do was to fund our payroll, so over 300 of us, from his personal bank account. He was a wealthy man, yes, but he funded our payroll for several cycles until the cash flow got better and saved the company. We found out about this much later. Nobody jumped ship. We all came together, made sure that we were still continuing to do great project work, and became very successful. So, you know, had he divulged too much, I think he'd have had a major problem. I think the company would have gone down. So there is that balance. And you know, he had the wisdom not to share too much.
Yeah, that's a big, 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 big topic. Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap our heads and our arms around that one. This is a constant discussion. Companies that last over 100 years actually have like documentation of half a century of successfully making these decisions and unsuccessfully. So there are ways to handle it. And I'm talking at the business level, but also at the individual level and at the project level too.
Yeah.
You know, again, let's pretend that one of my projects is being supported by a grant. And all of a sudden, you know, the grant money is being pulled for the second year. What are we going to do? And what if my project is, this project can't fail? You know, it's one of those critical projects that once you start, you can't stop. How are you going to figure this out? And this is something that is actually a difficult task for executives who are 30 years in the business, much less project managers. And so this may, with the economic turmoil of the next 20 or 30 years, number one, this could very well happen to all of us. And we need to be aware that there are sources of information out there to help us. But number two, it gives us an opportunity to be experts in something that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, even from my own perspective, I worked for many years in a very small niche. We'd go to the same conferences, the same 2,000 people would show up. We'd see each other, we'd compete against each other, we'd collaborate with each other. But if you were ever on a failed project, everyone in the industry knew that you were on that project.
Mm-hmm.
And so you did everything you could in order to keep projects from, well, obviously you do anyway, but you didn't want that on your resume because it was a black mark on your resume. So.
Yeah, it was a non-starter.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Now let's talk about one more topic here that I think needs to be talked about. One of the hallmarks of having a project is being able to not just talk about a deliverable that functions, but a deliverable that sells value. I think you remember IT, information technology, being a bit of a cost center. Early in the 1990s through early 2000, basically, you don't make any money for the company. Now, IT did something very wonderful. They were able to actually sell themselves not as a cost center, but as a center that creates value, not profit, but value. And so they were able to see the fact that they limited costs as a benefit. So profitability was no longer defined just as getting extra revenue above costs. It was also maintaining revenue, but driving down costs so you can actually explore the extra profit. And they were able to do this from a very smart way, measurable, achievable, and realistic. But they were also able to do it from a qualitative way, where we're able to work smarter. We're going to have a lot more disruptions, and it's not going away. And the one way to get people ready for disruptions is to have something that is worthy, and they want more. And so they're willing to put up with a little disruption to grab that extra value. So as project managers, I think we need to be plugged in thinking of projects, not just as a functional improvement tool, but a value improvement tool. And these are the tools that I think that if we can start offering to our project managers through the next season, I think we have something to really give.
Well, if you think about the fact that you and I are still here after decades in the industry, and all of my time wasn't spent programming or doing systems analysis. Much of that was project management. But I'm thinking the reason we're still here is because you and I figured out how to be adaptable, how to be resilient through all of these changes. And what you mentioned before, when IT was a cost center versus a value center. Yeah. I remember some of my first projects, and when I think back on them, all we did was we made manual work faster. There was really no improvement in that manual work. It just happened to be faster. So maybe we could get more customers to do the same, the same kind of work with the same workforce. But think of what we came from, and you and I were just talking about artificial intelligence, where that is turning industry on its head in many areas. So think of that leap from making manual work faster to actually reimagining people's work altogether. If you look at that leap, the fact that you and I are still here means that all of those steps along the way to get to this point, we were able to navigate.
Yeah, and I think you and I, through these major disruptions, learned that there are going to be threats. There are going to be negative risks. but we all were trained also to look for the opportunities and to weigh the opportunities against the threats. And you're right. The threat is it's going to replace people. Well, it's going to replace data collection people, but it creates an opportunity for the business intelligence people. It, like you said with your example of taking 3 answers and comparing them, right? And this is the work of an executive. It gives project managers an opportunity to delegate this stuff, not just to their team, but to tools. And if we can actually take this type of a mindset and expand it across the project management, all of a sudden, oh, we're getting things like project management software that doesn't just have a Gantt chart, but has a probabilistic assessment based on the loaded risks, you know? And again, we have to actually make the judgment call, and we have to understand the mechanisms behind how that software works. But wouldn't that make us a better result? But to do that, we have to have that change in mindset.
And that's the whole thing. I think that's going to be great for this year. Change in mindset, flexibility, resilience, adaptability, agility, all of these things that are new. Well, they're not new, but they should be quivers. I'm sorry, they should be arrows in our quiver as project managers, ready to take out. It's fine. The technical part, we will never get rid of that part. We still need to see flow charts. We still need to, we're visual people. We still need to see process and progress on timelines. That's fine. That's the technical and the process aspects of what our job is. But we need to be more than that as project managers.
Yes, yes. I think we have a very healthy season in front of us.
Exactly. So as I think you said, the next 30 to 40 years, I don't intend to do that, Tim. but I may, I've got a very comfortable chair here, and I've got a nice desk. I may put my feet up and kind of scroll through what people are finding, what people are doing and innovating, and say, oh, I wish I were there, but I'm glad I'm not.
Yeah, that's the perfect place to be. We are very lucky to be part of this process of change. But yeah, my best value I can provide to the community, project management community, is how can we prepare project managers to take our places? And that's what I want to hear from people. And that's why we're doing this show. How can we help you step up and start taking over some of these things so we can actually be the prognosticators and start putting 2 and 2 together and building tools for you all?
Well, and those tools are going to help those people who are listening to us right now leapfrog over us.
That's what we want.
Yeah,
that's what we want.
Yeah.
So where can we find you this next week?
Well, not yet in my easy chair with my feet up on my desk. But you can find me on LinkedIn under my name or under my company name, People First Project Management. And I engage. I love to engage on LinkedIn.
Very good. Very good. I'm still on LinkedIn. I'm going to be more active on LinkedIn. The important thing is, no matter what tool we're using or what channel we're using, we need to keep talking. We need to challenge ourselves and challenge each other. And that's what this show is about.
That's exactly what the show is about. For those people who are in it for the money and for the fame and all that kind of stuff, I'm less in it for that than I am in advancing what it is that we do in our careers and making a bigger pie for people out there who want to have an exciting career.
Herbert Maslow would shake your hand. Well, thanks again for a very inspiring discussion. Looking forward to starting off this discussion next week. And I think we would inspire and actually promote conversation. If you like these shows, tell us what you like about it. Tell us what you want us to talk about. And if you think you have something that you're struggling with, we'll bring it on the show, we'll discuss it. And we have an opportunity for this, not just to be a show with Merv and Tim, but open it up to the community. And I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah. All right. Until next week.
We'll see you then.